just as a brief footnote to this, a little bit ago you were telling me about this thing called Maui's rod. Now tell us what that is. It's from Maori mythology. Maui was their ancient hero god that founded these islands, right?
This means you're going to have to cut this out because it's going to be a completely different context.
But that's all right.
All Maori mythology talks about Maui, M-A-U-I, and Maui was a god. And Maui fished up New Zealand from the sea, and he had this waka, which was the South Island, and he had the swordfish, which was the North Island, which you can actually see.
The waka was a boat.
Yes, and Stewart Island, which is the other island, was actually the anchor. And so you wonder how they actually knew that when they're looking at it from above. Now, Maui, the mythology of the Maoris talks about Maui actually pointing his rod, and he would create a mountain, pointing his rod and he'd create a valley and a river. He could do all sorts of things with his amazing rod.
Yes.
And what's actually happened to us here that I've noticed with this radio tower, when it sank into the ground, where the frequencies were focused, we had these waves coming out, but then they put another little tower up here, and that was also set up to be like a radar wave antenna, but actually focused into the ground. And suddenly all over Christchurch you saw land going up, land going down, which was totally different to what was actually happening with the earthquakes. And Mr. Collison also, when he took the big tower down here, they were putting 30-metre metal rods down into the ground, trying to work out when they'd actually get to a hard base, because we're in the loop of the river, the whole thing's covered in water. It's a very ridiculous place to have a radio tower.
So you think they wanted those rods going into the ground needed to connect with some kind of bedrock or something?
Yes, they did, to put the tower back up again.
Would this be for
put the tower back up
just
again.
for physical strength?
Well, they have to stabilise it because it rocked and tilted before, so they had to do that.
But these rods can also be electrically conductive too.
Well, I didn't know that then, but what I've actually discovered was they left, when they took the big tower down, they actually left one of the big metal rods down and under the ground, and I've got photographs which actually show how they strapped that as a bridge to stop it sinking. When it started to sink further, they then strapped it up. Now, that rod I thought it was very queer what I was actually looking at with all of the quakes. The big quakes are all where the frequencies actually have collided on volcanic rock and seismically sensitive ground. But we'd have to go into that more to explain it more to you later. And the smaller quakes all over Christchurch, all the continuing quakes have all occurred where the licenses show the area frequencies are focused like the spokes of a wheel across Canterbury.
And you've got diagrams where you sort of map this out.
I've got the licenses showing where they're actually focused. And then the quakes are occurring where you've got Sugarloaf and particular South Shore are actually colliding on those points, a little bit like what you're looking at with the CERN applicator in Switzerland, where they put a frequency going across the frequencies that are going round a circle in an enclosed space.
And then it's the interference that generates
and
the
you
effect.
get the big bang.
Yes.
And that's what we're looking at here under the ground and over the ground, because there's absolutely no other way. You continually, it's beyond a coincidence that with thousands and thousands of continuing earthquakes,
over 11,000,
they're all only where the frequencies are actually focused. There's a real pattern to it.
Now, after some time, I guess it was in the late 90s, whenever you and your animals were getting very sick and you realized that you weren't going to be able to live here anymore, and you started to realize what was going on, you had to move away, but then you felt like you had to take some kind of action to protect yourself. So what happened then?
Well, it wasn't actually quite like that. What happened was that when they found that where the radio frequency electronic interference was happening, we also had sick people. This was taken to the council, and we wanted to have a study of what was actually happening. We wanted them to relocate the FM that was transmitting without consent back to the hills while there was a study.
Was this the same council that Neil Cherry was a member of?
No, Neil was regional council. This was the city council.
Okay.
And Neil was a terrific advocate helping us. And I had some very valuable racehorses here, and I didn't know what was happening. I'd gone, after Neil had told me, I explained to you before, that the excruciating bone pain I had could be caused by the radio tower. I didn't believe him, but I went to stay with my mother.
Had any of the horses died yet?
Yes, they died. They died in 1994, 1995, 1996.
And then you went to stay with your mom. And then you
I
got
went
some
to stay
relief.
with my mother in October 1996 when they said they were going to do an investigation. And I thought, well, while they're doing an investigation, until they stop doing what they're doing, I've got these very valuable racehorses. I knew they were being affected because their feet, there was something really seriously wrong and very unusual. So I took my most valuable ones that were racing over to stay with my mother. I came over here every day. I still had horses here. I still had cows here. And we asked that they actually, the radio network paid for the National Radiation Laboratory to do some monitoring. Barry and Mr. Slattick had already had the National Radiation Laboratory up here to actually monitor in August 1996, and the readings were so high they went completely off the meter. And they never warned the people, the National Radiation Laboratory never warned the people who were exposed at that time to 3,000 microwatts per centimetre they were exposed to, which is very, very high. And one of them has had a tumour the size of a baby's head removed from her womb, and she's been very sick, and as
just
has the other one.
to give a reference, 3,000 microwatts is the same as 3 milliwatts.
I don't know. I do know that 3,000 microwatts per centimetre is too high.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, far too high. And in the Environment Court hearing, the levels we were actually permitted to be exposed to when they reduced it all down after the harm was discovered, this was the 1999 Environment Court hearing, they said we were not allowed to be exposed to anything higher than 50 microwatts per centimetre. So 3,000 microwatts per centimetre is quite excessive in comparison to 50 microwatts per centimetre. I think that puts it into perspective.
Yes.
Anyway, the National Mr. Collison from the Radio Network, well, he was with Radio New Zealand, and what had actually happened was that they had sold Radio New Zealand, and Chapman Tripp had worked for Radio New Zealand when they sold the illegally transmitting Aruia FM as part of an $89 million Radio New Zealand package. And then almost immediately after that, Radio Network was a newly formed company set up by Sir Anthony O'Reilly, an Irishman with APN, and Clear Channel Communications, which is a Texan communication company. And as soon as they set the company up, the Radio Network, they'd brought into New Zealand media, and Mr. Collison was then employed by the Radio Network. Now, most of them were absentee directors, so he was in a very good position to actually hide that he'd put this on illegally, that all these people were sick, and for him to try with Chapman Tripp to make it legal, because then that would hide their own negligence and their legal culpability from the Radio Network. Because Radio New Zealand, when they found the sick people, what they should have done was immediately relocate the FM back to the hill, pay the Radio Network compensation, and just leave very low-powered AM on here. But that's not what happened. It was one huge big cover-up, and it's been a much bigger cover-up from that time on. So in 1996, October 1996, I didn't know. I mean, we were just suspecting that the problems were caused by the radio tower because of what Neil had said and because of what I then started reading in books. But Mr. Collison got Martin Gledhill from the National Radiation Laboratory to monitor at various places in the area, and he came back and he said that the readings were so low they couldn't possibly make us sick. Now, we found out in 1999, the places they actually monitored, if you go across to where my truck is, just spin around to where my truck is, you see that building that's actually there. They monitored where my truck is. So the building is between them and the tower, and the readings they were getting were absolutely nil. Now, they did this around the whole area, and now we've taken photographs of every site they actually monitored at, and every single one of them was behind trees, behind buildings.
So they engineered it to just give them low readings. That
the National Radiation Laboratory, who's an arm of the Ministry of Health, and Mr. Collison, who had worked for Radio New Zealand, which is a government-owned company, when it was sold illegally transmitting to the Radio Network, this international company, colluded together to hide what the true effects were.
Okay.
Then they went to a commissioner hearing in 1997, and the commissioner hearing gave them retroactive consent for the 2 FM here and let them double their stations to 4, even though the guru of New Zealand broadcasting, Professor Whale, had said you've got to have a thorough investigation as to what's going on.
How do you spell his name?
Whale, W-H-L-E.
Okay, like a whale.
He's dead now, and he was very helpful, and he just said, there's harm happening. It's a very, very unusual site for FM. It has to be investigated. Commissioner McCracken ignored his advice, ignored Dr. Cherry's advice, ignored Dr. Cherry's much higher readings, and allowed them, without any investigation, to put 4 FM on here, which increased the power to 300,000 watts.
And what year was that?
That was 1997, but it never actually happened. 100 of us actually appealed that decision, and we then discovered that Commissioner McCracken had made his decision on completely false evidence, because Mr. Collison claimed that 50% less power was required here at Aruia than up on the Sugarloaf Hill. Well, we then found out that 40 times more power was required here than on Sugarloaf Hill, so it didn't comply with what Commissioner McCracken said, which was it complied with Objective 8C in brackets, to minimise the effects of the utilities and as low as reasonably possible.
Okay.
So from 1996 to 1999, when they actually had the appeal hearing, we had Chapman, Tripp and Collison presenting false information completely to the radio network directors, to us and to the consenting authorities. We had after the commissioner hearing was discovered to have been taken on false evidence, the council actually paid for a small health study in the area, which actually showed that wherever the frequencies were increased, the people got sick. When they decreased it, the people got well. That was a professor from the university, electrical engineer, and a vet did this, and they asked for it to be expanded. Mr. McGruther was the vet, Professor Sweet and his wife were the main people who were running it,
Okay.
and Dr. Kurtamalitis was the electrical engineer.
Kurtamalitis.
Kurtamalitis.
Can you spell that?
No, I can't spell it.
Okay.
He's a Russian, and he's most amazing. He's probably New Zealand's most highly qualified electrical engineer. And Chapman Tripp obstructed them getting a bigger study. Then we went to mediation, and at the mediation, the radio network directors actually offered to fund a health study and to fund a human health study and a study of animals. Now, Chapman Tripp, Joan Allen of Chapman Tripp, obstructed this as well. 100 people wanted to participate in this, and they gave us very short notice to do it. And it was in the interests of the radio network to actually have the study done, because otherwise they were going to be taking on something that was causing harm, which was going to be a legal liability to them. Chapman Tripp, by this stage, were actually representing the radio network, and should never have been representing the radio network, because Chapman Tripp were the lawyers who sold it illegally, transmitting to the radio network in the first place. So they actually had they had their own reasons for trying to hide it all, and as did Mr. Collison. So that's really what has been the main problem all the way through, is that you've got these two people who caused the problem in the first place, now representing the radio network and putting false evidence into the courts.
Okay, well, let me just ask you one question to kind of summarize this. What would be their motivation, their obsession to have these ultra-high power levels? What was the goal behind that?
I think I explained it before. I think they think when they bring it down here low, there's two reasons. You're either looking at they're doing an experiment to see what the effects are on people,
Okay.
which you hope is not true, or they're actually boosting up the power at this low site to actually give them an advantage over other companies because it's coming in low.
Or it could be both.
It could be both. But once you've actually found out it causes harm, it's your duty of care as the engineer operators to actually turn the power down, because you know it's causing power.
But they turned it up.
Mr. Collison actually disguised the readings with the National Radiation Laboratory, told the people there was no problem at all, lied to the commissioner hearing, and turned the power up in 1996. In 1998, he put another AM station on. None of us knew. My cows got really sick. I got really sick. I suffered paralysis down one side of me. My blood changed, stopped clotting. This is one of the things that actually happens. It stops your blood clotting. That's the AM effect.
Yes.
Each of the frequencies seem to have a different effect, and you combine the frequencies together and you get a different effect
Yes,
again.
and I would say that in light of the dude doing this, that there's more to it than him just wanting to shout a little louder over the other stations.
Well, I don't know, because I think what you've actually got is in 1987 there was FM AM is very unusual from a low site, and that's what Professor Whale said when he wanted an investigation. In 1987, there was an investigation in Honolulu around an FM AM tower, similar to this one from a low height, and the research showed serious harm, and the 1987 High Court decision was in favour of the sick people. So Mr. Collison knew that when he put that here,
Yep.
and knew that when he sold to the radio network. You've got a legal precedent which actually shows
Yes,
serious
that he-
harm.
that he disregarded it.
And then when you find a serious harm here, instead of saying, yes, let's move it up to Sugarloaf straight away, he then increases the power.
Well, he should have been able to be legally shut down at that point.
Well, we tried to get him legally shut down, but this very powerful firm of Chapman Tripp seems to have tentacles right through New Zealand, and we found the council were being very obstructive and things were happening, but maybe that is because this particular site doesn't actually apply with OIO. You cannot this should never have been sold to an international company because it's actually a Maori heritage site.
Yep.
It's got a loop of the river going around. It's a recreational river and doesn't comply with OIO rules. There are so many things here. The designation seems to have been pushed through with nobody knowing about it, because after the Environment Court hearing, where the decision was to lower the power because Professor Abelin came he put in evidence from Switzerland around an AM tower. Dr. Hocking put in evidence what had happened where he had researched the Sydney FM towers, and Dr. Hocking diagnosed me and other people with the symptoms of radiation sickness or microwave sickness. And this was all put into the court, and the judge actually he said, no, you're only going to allow 1 FM here on what the readings are you've done here, and you're not to do higher than 50 microwatts per centimetre at the boundary. Now this is my boundary. This is my boundary with the radio network. So I'm the closest boundary here to the radio network tower. So we were told that the emissions decreased at the boundary and they didn't increase. Well, and after they'd said they were going to turn the power down, this Joan Allen came to the residence and she said that they would not put 2 more FM on. They would take 1 FM off. They would pay all the residents' costs. They would pay for Professor Abelin's airfare from Switzerland, and on condition. We didn't talk about what had happened to the radio tower here for 20 years. We didn't have a health study for 20 years. And if they did, they would put another FM on and fine us $10,000. So you've got these people, the Chapman Tripp, who've been putting evidence into the Environment Court saying there's absolutely no harm happening from this tower. And then next minute you're trying to get them, and they've been blocking all the research studies. And next minute you've got this legal company coming along and trying to gag us. So you have to say, what's going on? Well, everybody who lived here, because I wasn't living here at the time, was absolutely terrified that 2 more FM would be put on, because the readings that actually put into the court showed the levels were so low that there could be no harm and that they decreased at the boundary. This is what the readings by the National Radiation Laboratory presented to the court were. Well, we refused to have the gagging, and she came back and gave us the off without the gagging. But I think what actually happened is that the gagging was to try and disguise from the radio network that the decision had been to lower it and that they weren't allowed to increase it, because I think they'd bought it as a designated site where it could be boosted up. So Chapman, Tripp and Collison were all the time trying to hide their own culpability. Mm-hmm. So in 2000, every time I worked out here, I got sick again, and I thought, well, maybe I'm just now very sensitive to it because of the high exposure. So I actually rented the house to somebody else, but they got sick too, as did their animals that were there. And we've now discovered that in 2000, instead of Mr. Collison actually decreasing the power, he actually boosted it up. And he kept boosting it up. He boosted it up 2002, just 2004. And in 2002, we discovered that a National Radiation Laboratory monitoring that had been done in 1999 after the Environment Court decision. The judge had said he wanted them to do this. And I was actually here one day when they did it. And I arrived here, and the National Radiation Laboratory were monitoring here, and they were monitoring at the furthest point, the lowest point from the tower. And I had Dr. Kurtamalitis with me. And he said, no, you're not to monitor there. That's where you'll find the lowest readings. We're going to go and monitor in front of the barn. For the first time, we're going to have monitoring in front of the barn where Penny's horses have got sick. Well, they never gave us that report. He never told me when he was coming back to monitor. The only time they ever monitored clear line of sight, which if you turn around and focus back to the buildings there, you can actually see my barn from here over the other side of that tractor. You can see a green barn. Well, the readings there, when it was 2 FM and 1 AM were much higher than they were permitted for safe levels. Now, that was about a third less than what the readings would have been if they'd done it clear line of sight, when 2 FM and 2 AM were actually transmitting. So the evidence in 2002, we actually found this report hidden in the City Council, because they told us that the report said, no problem at all. That's what they told us after they'd done it. No problem at all.
So what
2002, we found the report, and the report showed that the emissions didn't stop at the boundary. They actually increased it 300
You wouldn't
meters.
think it would just stop right there. So, but what year was this tower at its maximum power output?
It's hard to say when it's been in its maximum output, because we tried in 2011, we put in a discovery for because everyone was getting really sick after 2000, and it just depends where it was focused to.
Yep.
I would think probably the maximum level. He's just gone on and on, putting it up and up and up.
And so, but so what do you reckon that the power level's at now that they put it back up?
Well, it's different at the moment, because what they've actually got is they don't seem to have AM operating off it. They've got all these microwaves going up the top. You can see the microwaves that are actually on it. And because they're trying to bankrupt me and get me off my property, they will then take this property over, and I would think they will move that tower off there and put it onto my land here, which means the boundary, they can put much more power onto it, and it will be a safer site because it won't be in it, but it won't be safer for the people who are actually getting clobbered with it.
But you mean safe physically for the tower itself?
Safer for the tower physically, that it won't actually sink. The risk of this sinking into the ground, this land here in the winter is covered with a metre of water. This land's all sunk. You can see a bit of water lying around here now, and we haven't even had any rain. It's been in a drought. And in the winter of 2012, the whole of this was covered in a metre of water. Okay. All of this area, if you look here, you can see the land dropping away here. This is where the waves have come from the tower, because the liquefaction was 300 metres, 800 metres, 2 kilometres, 5 kilometres where the peak of the wave was, which is what we found out from the National Radiation Laboratory in 1999. And this is all sunk. You can see this has gone down almost a metre from here. This bit's higher, and it's all sunk down there, so more water. And anyway, we went to, in 2002, we discovered that the readings, we'd been exposed to higher levels than we were permitted to from 1989, and I went to the High Court. I took my claim to the High Court. I took it to the High Court in 2002.
Okay, so in 2002 you took it to the High Court, and that was 11 years ago. 13 years ago. What's happened?
Well, I've been battling this now from 1996 right through. Everything has been cover up. In 2002, Chapman Tripp represented the radio network. We now know by law they were never allowed to represent the radio network, because they had actually been the company that involved the litigation in the first place when they sold it illegally transmitting. And I've actually recently discovered that all the big cover-up and abusive process by Chapman Tripp for the last 13 years has been because the radio network don't even know that there's a High Court case going on, and Collison and Chapman Tripp again have been running something over here completely without the knowledge of the radio network. It's all totally illegal.
Well, do they know now?
I'm just putting together a package of stuff that's actually going to them now.
So do you have any legal representation yourself?
I have had legal representation. But
they got bought out.
I had legal representation in 2003 when I went. Originally, they tried to strike out my case on the basis of statute of limitations, and the lawyer I had then was a man called Mr. Keller, and he didn't. I was really upset because I had some really important information to put in, which actually included the fact that in 2002 we actually found out for the first time that the frequencies didn't go off here, decreased here at the boundary, they actually increased, and that they were higher at my property. He didn't put that very important evidence into the court.
So your own lawyer was working against you? My
own lawyer was working against me, but the judge, Associate Judge Christiansen, actually let it go forward on nuisance and negligence, much to the fury of Chapman Tripp. And it was allowed to go forward on nuisance and negligence, and we were actually trial ready in 2004, and I had another lawyer then helping me. But they then tried to say that I had to put up security for costs, and I now know I didn't have to put up security for costs.
Who said that?
Chapman Tripp. And Chapman Tripp colluded with Mr. Keller.
Shouldn't the court be the one to tell you that?
Well, what happened was Chapman Tripp and Mr. Keller did, and then the whole thing is just an absolute nightmare of
Dishonesty.
well, you've got associate judges who are completely ignoring High Court rules. You've got all sorts of terrible things going on. And what is even worse is that in 2003, when Associate Judge said yes, can go forward on nuisance and negligence, the person who had been responsible for the nuisance and negligence was Mr. Norm Collison. In 2004, Mr. Collison increased the power on this guy wire here, which is the closest guy wire to me. He put in that he knew the power would increase here, so there were 2 AM and FM coming off this as well as microwaves. Now this tractor, people, you can see tractors here. I can't work up here anymore. This used to be my paddock for working the racehorses until we got really sick. But any of these metal, like this is an ungrounded metal tractor with big wheels, and the research shows that from an AM tower where you have that, you sitting on that tractor, it increases exposure between 4 and 27 times. Now that explains we've had 3 men working within 1,400 metres of this tower on or near tractors have all died very suddenly in unusual circumstances. Mr. Collison knew this because it was put into the court in 2003. 2004 he boosts up the power of the guy wire so that the people working here on this farm here, when they're moving big metal irrigation pipes with water all around, which of course is completely conductive, or sitting on tractors, they're exposed to 4 to 27 times higher than what is coming out already, and without the metal involvement it's higher than is the safe level. So to me, we're not actually looking at someone who's just being negligent. You're actually looking at someone who's deliberately intending harm.
Good spice. We're under your big favorite oak tree out back of your house here.
My walnut tree.
Walnut tree, sorry.
My 100-year-old walnut tree.
It's a beautiful one.
It is amazing.
And so she's protecting the house against the energies?
Well, because the tree roots, and yes, if you're behind the trees, you're actually protected more. The bedroom that I used to sleep in over there, I used to wake up at night feeling as if someone was drilling a drill through my leg, and I actually now know the frequencies focus right through there. And of course, when you sleep, I had a brass bed, and my brass bed conducted it much more. But I'd like to just get back to what we were talking about, what's actually happened in the High Court, is that they tried to obstruct my case going through all the way through. And the associate judges were doing everything that was biased to Chapman Tripp. The whole thing is a complete obstruction of justice.
It's a farce and a travesty, but has any of this changed now?
Well, it changed in 2010 because Justice Chisholm, Associate Judge Christiansen in 2008, they went back to the court and they did a strikeout, and he heard it again, and this time he reversed his decision, and he said that I must have known in 1993 that what caused harm to my cows was caused by the radio tower. And I said to him, how could I know in 1993? I said, you know, we didn't even know it was on. How could I know? And I said, if I actually knew in 1993, then Mr. Collison, who was the operator who put it on illegally, knew when he actually doubled the power in 1995. I said, we had no way of knowing. And he then made the judgment that it was strikeout out of time I knew in 1993. So I actually appealed that decision on the fact that he'd actually made that judgment when no new evidence had been presented, which is contrary to High Court Rule 262. And Justice Chisholm, who's the senior judge, then heard the case, and he said it didn't stop in 1993. It is an ongoing series of events. And he said no more strikeouts. We are actually going to have this as a full hearing. Well, of course, then the whole thing went into complete panic attack from Chapman Tripp, who then tried everything they could to stop it happening. And I now know why they tried to stop it happening was because in 2008, new owners purchased the radio tower, the land, for $317 million, and that was Bain Capital, who's Mitt Romney, and Thomas Lee, who are US big investment companies. And they had absolutely no idea. Everything, the evidence we've actually got now shows that they were never told that there was a High Court case going on. They were never told that since 1996 there's been legal acrimony, and the subject matter's been the emissions emanating from the 11.9 hectares of land that they'd just paid $317 million for, not knowing that it was actually causing a problem. So you're actually getting into something pretty serious, because Chapman Tripp and Collison didn't actually tell them that you couldn't increase the power on that. They bought it to expand the site. They weren't allowed to expand the site because the Environment Court decision was that it had to be reduced to 50 microwatts at the boundary.
Yeah.
And if you're actually using metal or anything else, it quickly gets over 50 microwatts just in a flash. I
Yeah.
mean, all the time you're overexposed.
So Bain Capital, who owns it now, could get really pissed off with these other people for devaluing their investment
Well, I would think that
and
this is...
making them legally responsible for it too now.
I think so.
So
This is
you're
what
actually, they're going to turn on each other.
Well, this is what we're looking at the moment, is who is actually responsible, because in September 2012, well, in 2012, we actually discovered that the Chapman Tripp were actually representing the radio network without their consent. We also discovered that the second defendant had actually ceased to exist in 2008, and they said that the new company had taken over the legal liabilities. Well, we now know that the new company didn't even know about the legal liabilities.
But that doesn't stop them from being responsible.
Well, I don't know, but
Well, see, they could
how
just
can you be responsible? You can't accept legal liabilities if you don't know about
but
them.
if they bought it, of course they could. I mean, but the law can be anything, and they could easily just go like, there's no one responsible for this. It all just happened accidentally.
Well, it's not. What is actually really frightening is that the insurance company, Mr. Collison, tried to blame Barry Robertson. You know, this is this blame game. You know, get rid of Penny Hargreaves, blame her, she's
Pass the
prejudicing.
buck.
Well,
Pass the carcass.
Try and do everything you can to discredit anybody who's standing up against them. And they said that he claimed that Barry Robertson had stolen $10,000 worth of copper wire from on the land next door. Well, the police came around and looked around Barry's property, and Barry said, well, could you tell me please where the copper wire was? So the police said this is where Mr. Collison said it was, and when he said it was, and Barry said, well, I've actually been taking videos of the Ruia radio tower land ever since the quake, so let's go through the videos. Well, the police then had to say, well, it's actually never been there, so this is a false claim. So they gave Barry the address of the insurance company to go and tell them that Mr. Collison was claiming $10,000 when there was nothing to claim against. It was a false claim. And when he went to see the insurance company, he said he was talking about the High Court that had been going on, a High Court hearing to do with the harm from the radio tower, and are you insured, are you going to cover this? The insurance company didn't know anything about it at all. And one of the reasons they didn't know about it was because in 2008, when Bain Capital actually purchased the 11.9 hectares of Arua land to expand the transmission site, the Deputy High Court Registrar had removed the Arua Hargreaves versus Radio Network High Court case, prematurely disposed it, and it had no longer existed.
But that's a criminal act in itself.
That's right.
Well, that guy should be charged.
Well, it wasn't the guy, it was the woman.
Well, but she should be charged, and then all this can be brought forward in your existing case now.
Well, my existing case has actually been struck out by this judge, Associate Judge Matthews, who I didn't actually oppose it because I put in a contempt of court against Mr. Jagos and against the Deputy Registrar for actually intituling in the name of a company that didn't exist anymore. The second defendant that I had sued in 2002 no longer existed. So how can you go to a strikeout hearing where the second defendant doesn't exist at all?
But it sounds like they're leading you around the block with all this more and more of this legal bullshit.
Well, I think the thing is, because I couldn't afford, after 13 years of having lawyers, I couldn't afford to have lawyers anymore. I can't earn my living, I can't live at my farm, I have to pay rent, and over 13 years you run out of capital to actually fight, particularly when you've been paying out big legal bills. I can't apply for legal aid because I own this land. So that means that I had to be my own lawyer. I've had to learn how to read science papers, I've had to learn. Dr. Kurtamidaitis has been amazing, teaching me all the electrical engineering information.
We need to have a talk with him.
We do. And now I'm having to be a lawyer. And I'm not a lawyer. And of course we went to the contempt of court hearing.
But that means you're honest. If you're not a lawyer, then you're honest.
Well, there are some honest lawyers.
Not many.
Well, we went to the contempt of court hearing, and the judge ruled in favour and said, well, under the law you can amalgamate, a new company can amalgamate and take the risks on, but what you've actually got is the new companies amalgamated didn't actually know what the risks were that were being taken on. So because they've never had it presented to them, they couldn't say, yes, I'm going to or I'm not. And Mr. Jagos, who represents Chapman Tripp, put in an affidavit into the contempt of court, and he said, yes, I have not complied with Part 13 of the 1993 Companies Act because I should have legally listed the name of the new company. He still continued to list the name of the old company, and then because of the strikeout hearing going against me, because I didn't oppose it and we had the contempt, Chapman Tripp then put in the name of the second defendant.
It's just a legal trick. They know what they're doing.
$72,000 they put in.
It's just a legal trick.
It is a legal
The people
trick.
who know the law, the law is made to be manipulated
I've
in the
tricked them
favor
back.
of those people.
I've tricked them back. I've put an application back, is that Associate Judge Matthews has been assisting Chapman Tripp in obtaining money from me under false pretenses, because you cannot put in an application for $72,000 in the name of a company that no longer existed from 2008. It's
But
like
see,
applying in the name of a dead person.
Yeah, but anybody can do anything as long as there's other people in cahoots with them that can
That's
let
right.
them do it, and that's what you're up against. The
That's
whole system's
what I've
corrupt.
had all the way
whole system.
through.
So how are you going to find somebody that'll actually be honest enough to actually help you?
I'm praying to the good Lord.
What if there are not any?
What if the good Lord's not there?
No, the good Lord's there, but what if there's not any honest people in the New Zealand judicial system?
Well, there aren't any that I've met yet.
Well, then what hope is there for all this?
Well, I'm afraid what you're actually going to find is that my property is going to be taken away because I'm going to be bankrupted, because then I can't afford to pay the $72,000, so I'll be bankrupted. They will then make this whole farm of 64 acres into a transmitter site, and everybody will be very badly affected across Canterbury.
So if people in the public heard this and wanted to help you, what can they do?
I have no idea.
Give you money?
I don't know. After so many years, you get to the point where you've battled for so long. You haven't sold the farm because you knew that anybody that was going to buy it, was, even though you couldn't live there, was actually going to suffer exactly the same effects as what you'd suffered.
But you were just saying that you think the frequencies have shifted somewhat now, so now it wouldn't be quite so bad if somebody was to live here?
Well, the frequencies here at the moment, because they've raised the height of the tower, the frequencies are actually going up over the top. But I don't think he's going to stop at what he's got here. I think he's going to turn it up. And I think that this is the whole plan as to what's actually going on.
This is the Collison dude, the mastermind.
Well, I think they sold it as a designated site. So the people who have actually bought it have bought it because they wanted to expand. So if they want to expand, that means they're going to put more frequencies on.
But they've got to get rid of you first.
Well, I think that's probably pretty easy. They've got far more arrows to their bows than I have.
Well, the one thing that's coming out of this is that you're, especially hopefully with this film that we're working on here, is we're getting the not only the message of your story, but the underlying information about the effects of electromagnetic radiation and microwaves on human, environmental, and animal and plant health. And this is so much of a global issue for the billions of people around the world. And
I think one of the most important things that I've actually found from anybody looking at ecology and the survival of man with what we're actually looking at here is they can get rid of plenty of people, and that won't actually cause a problem to the world. In fact, it'll help the recovery of the world. When you actually find that the frequencies are destroying bees, there were no bees here for 12 years. They literally vanished overnight. It destroyed the worms, the birds. So you've got the things that actually are used for fertilizing plants, and when you actually think about that, if they don't stop doing what's happening, I mean, all over the world we've got bee colonies that are collapsing.
did you know that the colony collapse disorder that happened globally, that came on all of a sudden in June of 2006, that was the exact same month when they activated the new Phase 2 upgrade of HARP and boosted its power by about factors of several tens of billions of watts.
I don't know about that. All I know about is what's actually happening on my farm and in the area of Christchurch and Canterbury. I don't know because I don't have the research on HARP. I'm looking at what the effects are here. I'm looking at the fact we used to have thousands of bees, thousands of birds, mice, rats, and suddenly, overnight, they literally vanished. The only thing we had was one very angry swarm of bees that came through. What we're looking at is increased bacteria wherever the frequencies are focused, and that increased bacteria affects the horses, it affects the bees, it affects the flowers, the plants, everything.
Is there an increase in fungus too?
Increased in fungus, absolutely increased in fungus. That is quite correct. Wherever the frequencies were focused, we were getting a massive mushrooms and puffballs, and also this fungus on the trees. The horses were getting fungus in their feet, which they'd never had before. People were getting fungus in their mouths, lots of thrush. These are the things that actually affect, everything. Everything is affected. It's not just, some are affected more than others. The different trees, the trees that are affected the most are the Lombardy poplar with the tall, sticky, like each one acts as an antenna. The pine trees, because each needle acts as an antenna. The eucalyptus, which we've seen burnt, and not just burnt here, burnt far further away, where the frequencies were turned up in December when they put the tower back up again. My eucalyptus down here that you can see through there, absolutely burnt overnight, 2 of them, and the silver birch, but just literally burned overnight, because the eucalyptus put off a vapor, which when you have a fire explodes. So they would be more vulnerable to the burning of the frequency when it hit them because of this vapor. And as we saw with the pine trees up at the tower, they're literally burning overnight. The ones we saw over on my hill where the trees were twisting away, the pine needles were all burnt off of those before, but they've altered the angles a little bit now. So when you alter the angles, the frequency is not affecting exactly where it was before. The pattern of the harm we're looking at is overwhelming in the spokes of the wheel where the frequencies are focusing from this very unusual site, and that includes earthquake harm as well. And the thing is, you can't just say, oh well, that's one tower. If he's doing it to one tower here, he's transmitting all over New Zealand. Is this also happening where the kiwi fruit are suffering their bacteria? Is increased bacteria and problems with the kiwi fruit, fungus or whatever they call it? Well, yes. Is that because the frequencies have been boosted up and focusing through there, the same as what happens at Pike River, where you can focus frequencies down a coal mine where there's gas and you can cause an explosion?
It's part of the whole new paradigm of waging of what you might call a covert warfare, or geophysical or geoengineering, using these invisible microwave electronic technologies that most people, like you said, it comes down to it. You can't sense it or see it or smell it or taste it. You can feel the effects of it, but it's invisible. And a lot of people you had a hard time in the beginning believing that these energies could have negative health effects, and now you know all too well that is the case. The powers that be have known this for a long time.
Yes, Tesla's known it since 1900s, and he knew that it could basically destroy humanity, as well as increasing earthquakes. And if you look at that research, you'll actually see how it works. But the situation for me was actually, as my health improved, I found that in certain areas, I would start to dry retch and feel very sick. And it was quite extraordinary, because it was like the spokes of a wheel. I'd drive in a circle around the tower, and each time it was exactly the same spot that I started to dry retch and feel horrible, and my dogs would cry that had been over at the farm and been sick. They'd cry and run in circles and whine and get upset. And then I drove a bigger circle. I drove a 5-mile circumference circle, and again I marked it on the map, exactly the same, and then I drove a bigger one, 10 circumference. So then when I put it on the map, it's like the spokes of the wheel coming out. And then I thought, well, if I'm feeling as sick as this, what's happening to the people who actually live there? And I started logging the deaths of the people in the newspaper to try and work it out. And I marked on these maps exactly where clusters of people were dying.
No.
And they coincided. And Nurse Maud, who are the people who operate the hospice here for cancer sufferers, I actually met with the manager of there, and I said to her, have you got a lot of cancer in Christchurch at the moment? She said, yes, we've had a huge increase in cancer, and only in certain areas, and we don't know why. That was in 1998. And it's actually written in my Hidden Dangers document that's on the Uruia website. But the pattern was extraordinary, and they said, it's amazing we're only getting in certain areas. And the other thing the pattern was increased child leukemia, increased brain tumours, again in the circumference of the radio tower, only where the frequencies were focused, and particularly between 5 and 10 kilometres.
Now, let me ask you you were telling me before about how they're shooting a lot of this stuff under the water, and this can be affecting the whales and dolphins too.
I don't know about affecting the whales and dolphins. What I do know is that I think about 25 years ago, a well digger, a company that digs wells, was taken down to the Antarctic, and they sank a 30-metre drill. They drilled a hole to put an antenna in, which the antenna could then transmit under the ice to submarines. Now, as I said to you, I've become very, very sensitive to frequencies. I can tell which is the AM, I can tell when it's microwave, I can tell when it's FM. I can also tell when it's sonar waves coming off the sea, which is the most extraordinary sensation. And at the time we were having a lot of quakes here, we were also getting the sonar waves coming off the oil ships that were doing their research offshore. So if I can feel that through the air when I'm on the ground, and that sonar's actually coming through the water, but I can still feel it. It's like feeling, it's like standing on shore and yet you've got the feeling of the waves coming off the sea, and it's quite extraordinary. And if you were in the water, if you were a whale or a dolphin, who would be far more sensitive than me to the frequencies, because they communicate by frequency. Well, we communicate by frequency too, but they're far more sensitive. I would think it could certainly disorientate them terribly. And when we were actually met that chap the other day when we were filming the trees at Brooklands, and he told us that the clams had actually died in the furrows
bands
lines.
or furrows, yep, straight lines.
That was extraordinary, because he actually was saying that the beam line, where he saw the furrow lines, when we asked him which direction, they were actually following the same beam lines as we're looking at Stokes from Aruria.
Very interesting.
Well, what was interesting was these tiny little chaps with their shells on were all huddling together and dying, and he said billions. I can't imagine it was billions, but it might be thousands, I don't know. But to me, and he said the fish have gone down there. Well, we've got, the frequency has been, when the Aruria tower sank in 2010, they continued to transmit, and then on the 21st, the day before the big quake, Mr. Collison actually put another station onto the guy wire of the main tower that sunk already, and the scientists who've been working with me say that that could actually cause a resonance into the main structure of the tower and actually cause it to sink. So when we had the February quake, the extraordinary thing was that between us and Avoca, where the epicenter was about 20 k's away in the volcanic plateau, it was like an Exocet missile had actually boomed out from Aruria or vice versa, and the harm was at 300 metres, 800 metres, ripped the side off buildings, and yet there was no other, on my farm there was no other bad quake damage at all, only like it went through the middle of it.
Beautiful little harvest of walnuts from Penny's walnut tree here. Thank you, Mother Tree. So what are we looking at here?
We're looking at the Aruria radio tower, and then you're looking at circles going out 5 kilometres circumference. So you've got the circle within here, that's the 2 mile circumference, that's the 1 mile circumference. So here's the radio tower, and you can see where the green is where the actual liquefaction occurred. And we've got another map that actually shows where the frequencies are focused. So here we had a lot of harm here at Spencerville, where it focuses through Spencerville. We had continuing earthquakes here, like 4 earthquakes. Up into Brooklands, the same. This was in the September 2010 quake. A lot of quakes along here. Quakes QE2. That was where it goes straight through QE2. And then the quakes, when they kept happening at the same places where the frequencies are. Now in early 2011 they actually moved the FM up to Sugarloaf, and the quakes stopped happening instantly and suddenly started happening in the circumference of Sugarloaf. So it was very interesting. Here the lines actually show
the beams?
Where the frequencies focused in 1996. Denise Ward had them computer mapped off the licenses.
Oh, so this is actual beams from their information?
From their information, that's Aruria's beams. The other one I've got is actually coloured maps. And then we've got Philpotts Roads here. Now the Philpott Road FM beams, you can see they're going the opposite direction through. Now they took the FM off at Philpotts Road in 1998 when we released our, or 2000 when we released our information.
And now where would Sugarloaf be on this?
Sugarloaf is away 20 kilometres away back the other way.
Okay.
But I've got another map that shows now. Where the green is where there's actual liquefaction. Now there's no other liquefaction anywhere else, only in those clumps and only when the earthquakes are happening. And it totally follows with the frequencies. You hear it go straight through QE2 to Sumner, and QE2 was devastated. That's the big stadium area. She can get some of this done on a computer map from the information, but I haven't had time to go through it with her. Here's the coloured one of how they did it. This was done by, somebody did it for Rose, and it's to do with Kaikoura. Now Kaikoura has got a lot of frequencies here on the peninsula. We've got volcanic rock here. This is that's just a flat, rather like Canterbury. It's just got a lot of water underneath. It's where the water drains off the mountains.
So this is Kaikoura.
This is Kaikoura.
Where is it all emanating from there?
Well, they're looking at it coming from the towers here, but I don't think that this is relevant to it. They're looking at the solars coming in off the sea. It was just one they did, but I don't think it's nearly as relevant as what we're looking at here in Christchurch.
Well, I mean, the point where it's all radiating from, is there a transmitter there?
Yes, a lot of transmitters there.
And that's the city.
But they're actually not transmitting into there. They're transmitting that way and this way. We come from Christchurch to there. But they do, the cell phone frequencies migrate across there, but not to the same extent as what we're actually looking at with radio towers, because it's not going to anywhere.
Okay, all right.
This is a map which was computer mapped in 1998 of where the frequencies focused through in 1998 from Arua and Sugarloaf, very high FM frequencies.
Is that Sugarloaf?
No, Philpotts Road, not
Okay.
Sugarloaf's right back here.
Now you've got South Shore, the one
We've got South Shore. Now the South Shore tower
Stephen Joyce used to own that.
Yeah, that's here. You can actually see it, and it actually goes all the way through there, all the way up to Aylesbury. So here we've got this very short tower, which I can show you a picture of later, or we can go and have a look at it.
What's at Aylesbury?
Aylesbury's just rising land. I mean, there's no way you should do a little tower that's about 30 metres high onto rising ground. I mean, again, we're looking at where are the controls. What's going on here? We've got inappropriate located radio towers. We've got Arua, which shouldn't have FM on it. We've got South Shore, which shouldn't have FM on it. And then we've got all these other frequencies crisscrossing across them. In Italy, they say you shouldn't have frequencies closer than 40 kilometres because of them actually crisscrossing, colliding, causing refraction. Mm-hmm. So we have no controls of the industry here.
It's an experimental colony.
I don't know.
Yep.
This is a transmission map of the Arua radio tower where the FM was actually focused prior to 1999 is this dark lines here.
Is the top to the north?
This is the north going up north. This is going back.
So your farm would be like about right.
My farm's there in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Because that's the Arua radio tower where it actually focuses out to.
Yep.
And in you can see where the main beams are actually focused through here to Sumner, to Woolston. That goes straight into Avoca Valley. The city centre where we had this huge amount of harm, Fenelton, Riccarton, Bishopdale, Harewood. Then in 1999, Mr. Collison, having been to the Environment Court where they said when the frequencies, power was increased, the harm increased, instead of decreasing it, which is what the judge wanted and put in his decision, and the conditions of consent, at the same time as they were trying to gag the Arua residents, Mr. Collison applied to increase the Arua power, to increase it up to 48 dBWs from, I think it was 40. It's a huge difference anyway. And this was the direction that it was actually focused through to. So we're now going to Woodend. It wasn't so much stronger through here, but so we've got this go straight into Avoca Valley, which is, now here's where the frequencies, you can see here was where it was, that inside line was where there was actually, you can see the peaks, it's got peaks of power that are focused. This is focused up to Waipara. So you don't get a lot of colliding of the frequencies going up to Waipara, so you're not getting a lot of quakes here because this is Sugarloaf here. So Sugarloaf is focused up there. Arua is focused up there. Arua is focused up here through by Oxford. Sugarloaf is focused from here through to Oxford. So you're getting a crisscross of it here, so we've had a lot more quakes there. Oh, sorry, that's Oxford here, but you are getting more there. There's Oxford here. So you've got Oxford going that way and Sugarloaf going that way, so you're getting the quakes here. Then you're going all the way through here, Springfield, Sheffield, all the way up to Lake Coleridge. That's where the epicentre of the quake was. So we've got Sugarloaf coming through from here, we've got Arua coming through from here, and where the epicentre of the quake was was where those two frequencies meet.
Was that the September quake?
That's the September quake, and you've got the Darfield one there. Now this bigger bit here, but you can see it's got a peak where it focuses through. And this is where it goes all the way through to Winchmore. And again, you've got the frequencies from Sugarloaf crossing here to go to Winchmore. You've got Arua coming through here that crosses. That's Horswell. I'll show you in a map in a minute of the huge increase in quakes at Horswell where the frequencies actually cross. Now this is the 1991 transmission map that they actually had, which is again quite interesting because we're looking where Arua, this is Arua and Sugarloaf. 32 BWs it was at Sugarloaf then, which is 1,578 watts. Arua was 48 dBWs, which is 63,000 watts. So you can see the difference in power. And then for some reason, Mr. Collison in 2008 has boosted the power on the Sugarloaf site up to 49 dBWs, which is 79,000 watts, and that's clear line of sight, so incredibly powerful. So we've got Sugarloaf here at the top of the Littleton Harbour, which is volcanic rock on the hill there. So where it's focused through here to there, that's Sugarloaf going through there. So you can actually see where the points are colliding. That's where the frequencies were colliding before they boosted the power at Arua and boosted it at Sugarloaf. So we've got here, what does that say? Where's Darfield? There's Darfield here. So when they boosted the power up, this is where the bad quakes were, they would have pushed those two where they're colliding here, would be pushed further out.
Okay. So what's the importance of the Halswell cluster here?
Well, I've just shown you the frequency, the maps, the 5 kilometre and the September quake, which actually showed the continuing quakes were in the same location as where the frequencies were focused on the licences, and that we had the liquefaction the same. Now, I actually wrote to Judge Skelton, who'd made the decision, and said to him what was going on. The next minute the FM was actually moved up to Sugarloaf. Here's Sugarloaf. And the pattern of quakes suddenly changed completely. We then got the quakes in the circumference of Sugarloaf. So here we've got Horswell with many quakes. Arua comes through here. Arua was transmitting under the ground as well as over the ground with the AM. Now the AM low frequency is apparently what causes the quakes, so the scientists tell me. So then you've got Sugarloaf, which is a very high frequency, focusing down here. This is a volcanic plateau. All of this was 2 extinct volcanoes, probably 3 or 4. Anyway, Sugarloaf's up on top of these, and because it's very powerful, it can actually focus down into the volcanic vents that are all located around the top of the hills here. That's what happens.
And so again, there's people that they're doing this on purpose.
I don't know if it's on purpose or whether they're just incompetent or what's actually going on. Okay. I have no proof that it's on purpose. No,
I know, but I mean, but
all I'm looking at is a pattern.
If we know this, then other people would too.
All I'm looking at is a pattern.
So is there anything significant about this area?
Well, Horswell's low-lying and wet. So it's actually a very heavy peatland, so there's a lot of water there, and the Arua focuses straight through there to Lincoln and onto Green Park. That's where the licenses show it focuses through. So what you've got here is Sugarloaf colliding with the Arua frequencies, approximately 20 kilometres from the Arua Tower.
Would there be any reason, any way anyone could benefit from there being a bunch of quakes here?
Nobody would benefit from it. All you're doing is shaking up Christchurch.
Was there a lot of natural gas under the ground there?
I don't know. I believe the natural gas is all actually up on Pegasus Bay, but I would guess there's probably... I don't think so. I think it's just... If you were looking at it as deliberately the way to actually get rid of people and to completely upset their whole economy and
it's in the wrong place.
Their life is... No, but there's frequencies. This was that day, and then another day it's another place.
Yeah. They probably monitor where it all is.
I don't know. The metal sewer pipes only jumped out of the ground in Christchurch, and the railway lines were only damaged in areas where the FM and AM frequency focused through in September. That was through Brooklyn, Spencerville, Belfast, QE2, Kapoi, and the pattern, it was quite extraordinary. And apparently, according to the researchers, because they're metal and they've got water pipes, the frequency pumping underground from the sunken Arua Tower could actually cause the vortex and the extra
now,
power.
who would have advised you on something like that?
Dr. Goldsworthy and Dr. Goldberg.
Okay. Andrew Goldsworthy?
Yes.
What's Goldberg's first name?
I don't know. Gerald.
Okay. Are they both local?
No. They're international.
Okay.
No. Now this one here is interesting because here you're looking at the volcanic shape of the Port Hills. This is all volcanic, that's volcanic rock. And here we have the Lyttelton Harbour, and the star here shows where Sugarloaf is. Here we have the Lake Ellesmere, and apparently the day before the September quake, the Anandako sonar ship was operating off Banks Peninsula. Well, if it was actually, and they said there were a lot of gas explosions the week before. They said the evening before the September quake, the Anandako ship Aquila limped into Lyttelton Harbour looking as if a bomb had hit it. Now, if it had been operating off here, you can see all of this grey area is actually the drainage. That's all underground, big aquifers, water draining off the Southern Alps down into Canterbury. And the epicentre of the quake, of the September quake, was actually here against the volcanic rock. And the maps I showed you before showed that Sugarloaf focuses through here, Aruia focuses through here, and where the main epicentre was here, reverberating down through to Darfield, which is where we've got this green star here, and that's on the Selwyn River. So we've got the catchment ward here is all the Selwyn River, so the water becomes very, very conductive. These red lines we've got here are new fault lines that have actually come. Now they're actually very interesting to me, because here,
only 30 seconds left on this tape.
Here we've got Aruia here, and the beam lines going out here, shaping that way. Sugarloaf and Aruia both go that way. This way, Sugarloaf and Aruia go that way. This way, Sugarloaf and Aruia. So they follow the lines of where the frequencies are actually connecting onto the seismically sensitive land.